All right, guys. So you are tuned in to the Progress or Performance Roundtable. I'm going to do a bit of talking, probably fill up about 10 minutes of groundwork, and then we'll get into talking to our panelists. So let me pull up my document and get going. So, as I was saying before, I am activist and bicycle advocacy consultant Courtney Williams of the Brown Bike World, where I partner with governments, nonprofit, and other leaders of transportation and cycling advocacy to increase access for Black and Indigenous and people of color to access the many benefits that there are to cycling. I do that primarily through diversity education and equity inclusion seminars. In 2020, you might also have gotten to know me as the People's Bicycle Mayor of the Lenape and Canarsie lands known as New York City, where also I have received help from Marzhel, who I'll introduce in a second. I've received help from Marzhel and a lot of other local mechanics to NYC to produce the recent Big Fix Day BK, which you can look up as a hashtag. While I imagined and organized a way to fix 100 bikes for free for high COVID diagnosis, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color neighborhoods that are in transportation deserts. And this is an issue that I'm going to take forward into the year 2021 because it is important, but seldom acknowledge the intersections between our availability of biking and what we do to help BIPOC communities and community members be on bikes, and the intersections between health as well as economics, psychological wellness, physical wellness. So I welcome you this evening to our second annual Racial Equity in Cycling discussion. As I said, there's a person named Marzhel who's going to be on this roundtable, who is actually the person who first envisioned the roundtable and is the benefactor of the roundtable. So I will do his intro first, which is that Marzhel Salvador Pinto Mojarro is a proud and talented intersectionally minded Mexican pro race mechanic, as well as owner of a neutral race support team, and manager and head wrench at a sort of high-end bike shop outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he lives with his partner Elyse and family member mascot Meche, the dog. He's also a member of the Professional Bicycle Mechanics Association, a predominantly white industry organization that certifies folks for their wrenching abilities. This year, Marzhel was a part of successfully organizing and advocating for the first ever BIPOC grant program from PBMA, which is aimed at diversifying the mechanics industry by making $11,000 available for folks to receive professional certifications from the UBI Institute. And that the hopes for those certifications that they will significantly help the individuals of color advance their careers and bring on more and more generations of mechanics of color. So, a little more about tonight's panel. The roundtable is a result of a collaboration that started from a conversation between myself and Marzhel, where we met each other at the Philadelphia Bike Expo 3-ish years ago. And what happens is Marzhel sets the vision and invites some esteemed panelists, the rest of whom I will introduce in a moment. And I get the free reign of saying what the conversation is going to be. So, as you probably know, especially if you're in the United States, but I don't think it's been avoidable this year, that after the killing of Black American citizen George Floyd by excessive police force in Minneapolis, Minnesota, there was a spark of another period of civil demonstration for racial justice, led by the Black Lives Matter movement that took over our spring, summer, and should be continuing to fall, winter, until whenever that is resolved. But as a result, some bike brands, as well as nonprofit pro-bike advocates of transportation, finally responded in mass with responded in mass to some long demanded requests by BIPOC folks for representation, for equity, for justice to be integrated into those organizations' existence. The responses have ranged from discovering that Black and Brown people can be models for their brands and putting them into advertisements, to creating marketing campaigns or just pronouncements that Black Lives Matter, Black squares. Some have ended contracts with the police. Some have told their audience to become more involved in issues. And so we're going to kind of talk about how those are progress or are they performance in the eyes of our panelists, and ultimately the direction that the panelists feel we should be going in 2021 to make meaningful impact for Black and Indigenous people of color. Our panelists, in fact, approach cycling from several industries and disciplines, including photography, literature, competition, retail, and as I said before, mechanics and wrenching. They're going to share their insight. So I would be remiss if I did not first acknowledge our sponsors. So I'd like to give a thank you to the Greater Philadelphia Bicycle Coalition, who is providing us the IT support to have registered as many of you as there are, as well as helped us tonight. Stephanie Fneri is the deputy director, is giving us all of the technical support right now and helping us live stream onto YouTube. So snaps and thank you to you all, as well as Philadelphia Bike Expo, which we hope to be the home of the panelists of the panel and roundtable when the pandemic is over, has contributed some seed money to funding or compensating our panelists. This is a free event, but let it be understood always that when there are free events, the time, the effort of preparation, the vulnerability, and the risk that BIPOC panelists expose themselves to on your behalf of education is not free. Everything comes with a cost. They are professionals in their own rights, expert in their own rights, and we have made this opportunity available and free so that there are no barriers that keep anyone from learning. However, if you are a person who is of privilege, who does not currently face a financial barrier or other barrier to contribution, we ask that you make a reasonable contribution to the Panelist Compensation Fund. And that information is going to be put into our chat box by our other assistant of the day, Lee Galdo. So they will repeatedly drop that link for you. But the way that the compensation fund works is that you're able to give electronic donations to Marzhel, who then distributes it out evenly and fairly without any money off the top to the panelists. So thank you all for that consideration. Now, technicals, there is a chat box, as I just mentioned, but the chat only goes between you to our technical assistants. The panelists themselves and I will not be monitoring it so that we can have a seamless conversation. But if you do have questions along the way and that you would like clarity about, we're going to have a Q&A box. So the Q&A box, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, is a little box that says Q&A, and you can put questions there as well. Even if you don't have your own questions, you are encouraged to look at the question and answer box and vote up or vote down questions that you would like to hear answered. Questions are going to be reserved for the end of the roundtable discussion, with about 30 minutes for panelists to answer them. As well, if you're watching on YouTube, there is not a comment section or a chat box. So just enjoy and learn. I encourage you, anyone who's watching in any form, to take notes because I'm sure that there will be lots and lots of gems dropped this evening. All right. So now we get to the good part where I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their videos, and I will give them introductions and read their bio. So Elyse, Christina, Marzhel, there we go. There are their beautiful faces. All right, so first off, I'm going to read this as she sent it to me because it's funny. Elyse Bejasa, and that is emphasized, pronounced Bejasa rhymes with Mufasa. She, her is a second generation Filipino American who was born and raised in Queens, New York. She has considered herself a cyclist since 2013, starting off as a commuter in New York City, and now is primarily a community biker, advocate, and competitor. She currently races for WTF Gravel Squad, the gravel team affiliated with the WTF Explorers, a national organization seeking to connect people who have self-identified as women with X, trans, and femme identities, or as non-binary. Elyse is an advocate for more BIPOC in racing and all other cycling spaces, and currently lives in New Orleans, where she just bought a house with a yard for her 2 dogs and her 2 bikes. Hi, Elyse. Second, scrolling. Christina Torres. All right, Christina, here I go. I'm gonna say it all right. Christina Torres, her ella as a Kawaiisu, Shoshone, Paiute, and Chicana of Tejon tribe in California. She currently resides in the unceded ancestral lands of the Lenape Wappinger people in so-called Hudson Valley of New York. Christina is the zinester, that's the founder and editor of Cyclista Zine, the decolonial feminist response to the cycling industry. She has been cycling and writing as a blogger and cycling advocate for over 12 years. She started Cyclista Zine in 2019, last year, as an independent media to shed light on the lack of inclusion of BIPOC and WTF communities and to disrupt the mainstream narrative of who cycles. In April, Christina spearheaded the Name the Change campaign and successfully got Lifetime Cycling Event Company to change its anti-Indigenous name of a gravel race, formerly known as DK, to Unbound Gravel. She continues to utilize Cyclista Zine to educate on issues in cycling, along with advocating for Indigenous representation and land stewardship in cycling. Hello, Christina. And finally, there's Eric Arsey, he, him, L, is a photographer based out of Salt Lake City, Utah, by way of Los Angeles. The son of Mexican immigrants, he centers people of color in his photography. He is pursuing a breakthrough in the professional cycling media and wants to show the power of the bicycle in transforming lives of our BIPOC communities. In 2020, Eric, that's Pedal Homie on IG, if you follow or wish to follow, co-founded Pedal to the People with his actual bike homie, Rachel Olzer, to bring the stories of BIPOC cyclists to light. That is everyone. I'm so pleased to have you here. Y'all can unmute yourselves and let's get into this good conversation. How y'all doing?
Good.
Good. Whew. I feel like I just talked a lot. Let's take a swig.
Water. Dehydrated.
So, let me move this little document out of the way, see your smiling faces, and get into it. So I sent out some questions. So the panelists and I have had some, of course, prep work, so we know what the heck we're doing in life and what we're talking about. But because this conversation is about authenticity of actions performed by the bigger bike industry, and that industry ranges right from retail to competitive events, even down to the community level of folks who just want other folks to bike. Like it's all an atmosphere and a hemisphere. So the question is, a lot of things have happened in 2020 when it comes to that en masse response of cycling brands and whomever else concerns you, responding to the civic uprisings. What's been the most notable, like it can be an incident or like phenomenon that you noticed, and how did you feel about it? I know one of the popular things that people talk about in terms of authenticity is the use of those black squares that came up for like what was it, a Tuesday, a random day during the summer. They were like, if you want to show solidarity for Black Lives Matter, put this black square on your Instagram. And that happened a lot. So feel free to riff from there. And everybody doesn't have to answer. It's what you feel in your heart. Okay, Christina, you're breathing, so go ahead.
Let's be real. That was the biggest one. That was everybody. That encompassed everyone. Like whether you're a brand or whether you're an advocate or an athlete, so many people posted a black square. Mm-hmm. And I get the point behind it, but I did not post a black square because I knew that people who were organizing with protesters were also utilizing social media to help others, especially when it came to mobility, being able to access people and help folks. It just completely wiped out access to the information people needed to have. And it was not only that, like after posting the black squares, like nothing else happened. Everything else was silent. So I think that one is a really huge one. And I think that one particularly was my favorite, probably. just speaking on the terms of, oh, we put a black square and didn't do anything afterwards.
So is it what more bothered you more, the fact that it was disruptive to the organizers, or that there was
meaningless.
No follow-up? Okay. It was meaningless because of the lack of follow-up?
It was meaningless mainly because the lack of follow-up, and then not really stating anything else that was going, no real tangible impact from that.
Okay. Y'all want to add on or bring up something else?
I mean, I'll have to piggyback on that for sure. The black boxes drove me insane. And, if you look at a lot of the people who did post black boxes and kind of go through since then, right? We've got about 6 months of their real personalities coming out a little bit more. There's not much else, and that is the definition of a performance, right? A performance has a start, a middle, and an end. It closes at a certain time. And, so when you have these black boxes and, people put them up on their temporary profile pictures on Facebook and things like that. If you look then at the next few months, the next few weeks, there's an influx in webinars and books being read and things like that. But then the performance ends and it's no longer important. And I saw that a lot in a lot of gravel race organizers, a lot of teams, a lot of just, the cycling industry at large, and also on local levels that have done that. And it's disingenuous and without real action. It's just like, I'm not, it was a bad performance. I'm not even gonna like clap for it. It was just like, oh, cool, you did the bare minimum. But yeah.
So I am inclined to ask this question on behalf of any audience member who's like, but I meant well when I did it. Why do we think that since the evaluation and just by votes, Eric, Marzhel, are we on the same page about like, boo, black squares? Okay, yes, Caesar says no. On behalf of the folks who are like, but I did it and it was well intended and this is what I meant it to mean. What is your response or insight into that? Like, why is it, besides if you have any opinion of it, but like, besides it being a start, middle, end, finite performance, why is it that the black squares went wrong? Like, it was obviously very popular. It reached so many people. How did it get there that it was so popular? And then why did it go wrong?
I always go to impact versus intent when it comes to performances. In my opinion, one of the easiest ways to explain that to people is when you go out and you drive your car and you hit someone, your intent was not to hit that person, but the impact was that you hit that person. Regardless, literal impact. Yeah, a literal impact, and also the impact on their life and subsequent days is that they got hit. So regardless of your intent, if the impact is harmful, the impact is harmful, period. And so I think that that's where, the kind of the frustration is, because you can't just mean well and do, pardon my language, shitty things. It's got to come hand in hand.
And I would like to say, if you're watching this with your children, this is adult conversations. For more words like shitty will be said, and no one will be wagging their finger at anyone. There you go. Fellas, y'all want to chime in on anything, or you want me to ask your next question?
Would you mind rephrasing the question just real quick?
Oh Lord, see, I can't backtrack on questions. Why do you think?
I was paying attention. I want to get like.
Why do you think it is that the black squares went wrong? You know, where intent was positive, and it was obviously very wide-reaching. Do you feel like there's some elements of that campaign, I guess it was, that helped it go awry just from conception?
So I know a lot of these companies have a lot of money to throw around. I've seen it at industry events, just very exuberant and excessive, like bar tabs or dinner, so I know they have money to actually do something about what's going on. At the beginning of the year, I was at an industry event and happened to be a fly on the wall conversation between two white men who like are heads of their company, and they were very proud of themselves this was the weekend before New York shut down.
Okay.
So they were very proud that their children were sitting at the table with all the Asian American kids, because at that point, most of those kids were being pushed aside because of the coronavirus and like the way the White House was calling it at the time.
False association, yeah.
And they were very proud that their kids would sit at the table with these disenfranchised youth at their school. Come to the Black Square, I reached out to some of these folks, including these two white men, and I asked them for like, hey, I need a Black Square, because they didn't even post the Black Square. Like the other way the Black Squares went wrong is some people just chose not to do them. Like they wouldn't even go forward with the performance. And I remember just asking them to like, hey, just like you taught your kids to sit at other people's tables, can you sit at our table? Can you follow up? Can you have a Black Square and follow up? And I was met with silence.
And just to clarify, when you're talking about sit at our table, you're speaking metaphorically, do perform some ask.
Correct.
Okay, on behalf of BIPOC folk. I got you. Why do you think it is, anyone? Why do you think that it is that this year elicited this en masse response? Of course, as Marzhel just pointed out, it was not everyone, but a significant portion of folks made the effort to at least appear like they were trying. Why do we think it happened that way this year? Like what, for the performance aspects and the actual, gains that were made this year?
If we're specifically talking about the Black Square was a trend. It was a trend, and kind of like, was it started by a music company that had asked people, hey, if you want to stand in solidarity, you post this on Tuesday. So hashtag Blackout Tuesday. But the thing is, it was a trend. And then kind of like a lot of the protests that were being had this summer, in the beginning, the height of summer, they were really, a lot of people went out and protested, but then they all died down, and then the diehard protesters like stayed around. So it just seemed more like it was a trend. Now, the response at large to me also was like a trend. And that's the base of how I see it. Like social media, when trends start to pick up, a lot of people start to follow those trends. So I think it was just largely a response to this trend rising, and like here's a great social media opportunity for us to seem woke. So I think that was a huge outcome of a lot of this. The impact of it is that.
Well, every trend has a trendsetter, right? Like in the world of making a difference or just being noticed, there are trendsetters, and then there's like OGs, right? People who are authentically about a cause and have been speaking of it and for it for a long time. Like, for example, you, Christina, you've been blogging about Indigenous issues and bike issues for 12 years. I'm sure, and you can confirm or deny, like with BLM's big going on this year, do you feel like the growth in Cyclista Zine was responsive to that, or like partially related to that, like people's interest in your issues?
I think the growth, Cyclista Zine's growth, was not particularly part of that movement.
Okay.
I think we started in 2019 at the end of summer. I think that we've been talking about these issues of like mobility justice, and then access and entitlement in cycling. I think maybe the conditions of what's been going on in 2020 have helped the visibility of it, probably because we're more outspoken about things. But I do think that, these conversations have been going on for so long. The representation and inclusivity conversations have been going on for so long. So I'm very suspicious of when, because it's never been talked about it as at a mass scale as it has been till 2020. So I'm really like, ooh, I don't know if I really trust this atmosphere, because it's never been talked about before, when so many of us BIPOC cyclists have been talking about these things for years.
Eric, I'm gonna pull you in. How do you feel about that sentiment of like the trustworthiness of this all of a sudden becoming of merit in the bicycle industry?
Yeah, I think after George Floyd's murder, we kind of saw this, I guess, quote unquote racial awakening, right, within the cycling community. And all of a sudden, all these cycling communities are like, hey, we want to take your picture. Hey, we want to put you in this magazine, because they realize, oh shit, we're really white here. And because of that, they started reaching out and they're like, okay, well, I also, if you're going to use my photo, I also want to say this as well. And they're like, whoa, that's going a little too far, So like, I think it's really important to ask when talking about representation, like, what does it representation mean? Like, are we representing ourselves in the way that we truly are? Or are they wanting to represent us in the way that they see us, right? And we're kind of at that crossroads right now where they're getting a lot of pushback from people, from BIPOC, going like, I don't like how you're portraying me. And so they're like, why are you so upset? It's like, no, this is really important to not only who I am, but how I'm treated, right? So it's about like really talking about realities that are true to yourself.
Now, when I spoke to you in preparation for this and getting to know you, you were telling me that, and this also ties back into one of the phenomenon of the summer when it comes to representation. So number one, I feel like for the last 2 years, I think the leading, I guess we can call it sentiment for equity has been representation matters, right? And that has been received in terms of optics. Like, it matters that people of color see themselves physically in ads, on, posters or whatever, to inspire, basically, one, to let the people know who are out there that they're not alone and that they can do it, but also that the next generation, right? Like, it kind of seeds this little kid looking up to this image of a bigger person like them. And I think that's become kind of made everybody focus on the optics and the visuals parts of it, right? So when it comes to representation, you told me that representation behind the lens matters as much as it does in front of the lens and being captured as an image that people can use. Can you tell me what you felt like as a BIPOC photographer to see this explosion of BIPOC representation, be it temporary or long term, but not see a growth in photographers actually being represented?
Yeah, it's kind of like mountain biking relies on storytelling, right? So one part of the storytelling is writing, another part is like videography, and the other part is photography. So, it kind of went from, all right, well, we're mostly going to capture white folks, but now that it's trendy, we're going to capture BIPOC, but through white photographer lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that has really limited like the kind of storytelling that can be told. And I think that's where, as like models, like you can really like push for more, even more representation by asking for a photographer of color. Like there's no, most of the jobs that I've gotten with biking companies, it's because a woman of color advocated for me to be the photographer. So it's really important to like look at the community and see what we can do for each other, right? Like kind of pushing for each other to really get in those spaces.
And what is it, for those of us who are not visual arts and photography people or storytellers, like what are the aspects of storytelling that composes this BIPOC lens, right, versus a white lens? Like what is the benefit of, other than just checking the box that my photographer has brown skin or black skin? What would you say that you will be able to do different?
I think having a unique perspective and being able to pick up these cultural nuances, right? That's important to the writer. It's like I think a lot of photographers are like, oh, that looks cool, but why does that look cool? You know what I'm saying? Like if something that's very important, like for example, like when I was doing a project with Renee, like it was really important for her to capture like while she's writing, like how she interacts with Sage on the trail. And so for me, like it was like super important to highlight what is culturally important to her in ways that's respectful and dignified.
I feel you. What I can do, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna show the world some of Eric's photos and what he's referring to. So y'all see this?
Yeah.
So this is Renee. What's Renee's last name?
Hutchins.
Renee Hutchins is a native cyclist, and this is one of the photos where Eric's talking about. So, we look at this image, and when he sent it to me, I was like, so I get an inkling, like, but what am I looking at? So this is Renee riding through Sage, which, a level deeper, what is the significance of that for, this rider?
Yeah, when she was riding by it, she said that like when she like touched it and it like brought out the aromas, that it really reminded her of home.
And there she is with her moccasins on, riding her bike, which is a cool, statement of her ancestry. And I think it's super important. I can certainly share that nuance matters so much. And this is something that I try to educate everyone who learns from me in equity training. It's just like why it matters to have people of color inside of your organization, and not just one or just two, but just all up in there, is that there's a learning curve to cultural competency that as a white person outside of the oppression, you will never catch up. You're just never going to catch up. And if you do catch up, that curve is so steep, it'll be way down there, and we can't wait for that. Right? So bring folks on board. So I definitely can relate to having given interviews, for example. People have begged my time and my energy and my presence, and had me go through questions over the questions and questions, and then I see the interview printed and I'm like, this don't even sound like me. Or the brown bike girl gets turned into a Black woman for other Black women cycling. I'm like, when have I ever said anything about Black women cycling, right? It like the lens just turns into what that editor wanted to say, and just not even knowing how I wanted to be heard, or missing key phrases that another person of color who knows the significance of those phrases would miss. So yeah, absolutely. I totally get that. So here's a transitional question about being seen, heard, and understood. Do you all think that, well, let me back it up 1 second and then go there. So one of the ways, or often the ways, that folks in the cycling industry get their jobs, their opportunities, their sponsorships, or whatever, is like there's a heavy amount of networking in cycling, right? It's a lot of friend groups. And since cycling's issue has been that it's been predominantly white and predominantly male. We're having white men hanging out with other white men, giving them opportunities because the way that they move is very much oftentimes informal. Even though it's a big national or international company, a lot of this is moving very informally. And in my opinion, that speaks, it might be like an indication that a little bit of maturity is like a little informality is valued within the bicycle industry, right? So like hanging loose, we're gravel, hanging loose, we're adventure. It's always supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be light. We're not supposed to take ourselves too seriously, or bicycling loses all of its joy. Do you think that when, one, do you think that's valid? And then two, if so, do you think that when these heads of companies, opportunities, the recruiters or whomever, look at BIPOC people, and I mean, and when I say look at, I do mean like consider us as whole entities of energies and people you have to respond to. Do you think that they might be looking at us as something too challenging and too outside of that ability to be formal, informal, and relaxed? Like, just if you get where I'm going with that, just comment on, I know a lot of times, like, for example, we can walk it back to gender, right? Like men often don't want to have women or femme people around because that means they have to stop making jokes and saying nasty things about women and femmes, right? So similarly, I don't know, I get the inclination, or I feel that it might be possible that BIPOC are looked at and it's just like, damn, now we might have to like level up and act professional, because handling us is not, telling our stories is not just something you can play with.
Yeah, can I add to that?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of respectability politics that gets played out when it comes to hiring, like wanting BIPOC to be of a certain respectability, which is centered in white supremacy. It's having to act a certain way so that we come off nice, that we come off at, not as ourselves, not as our cultures, that we fit in, that we assimilate to a certain standard. So I can understand where like our stories, because of, the hundreds of years of oppression and the cycles that continue through that, those can come out through our stories. Those can come out through the interactions. So when it's being called out, I think that's the biggest thing that people worry about the most. Like, ooh, I can't be this, or I can't be that.
Do you think it's fair? And this is something that I asked of a BIPOC filmmaker who was talking to me about a BIPOC film fest that we were putting on. We're doing some education. And I asked him the question on behalf of future BIPOC filmmakers: do you feel like you have to be political or make a political statement with your films because you are Black or brown? Because I know that even though I have a lot of conversation that can be made about equity, about the distribution of bike lanes, not being in Black communities, about the quality of things, about people being separated into the farther boroughs of New York because of racism, segregation, all that stuff. While those conversations can be had, I can also just be a happy brown person on my bike, right? Like we all have those stories and pictures and times where it's just, here I am, I'm brown, here's my bike. Do you think that even just the face value of how we ride our bikes or where we ride our bikes, because ultimately when we say bike industry is capitalism, right? It's about marketability and making a dollar. And if the number one patrons are white and male, are we a mismatch for their dollar? Is that what they're seeing?
I would say that, the way that I look at it is our existence is political, right? Like I don't need to sit here and wax poetic about all the different ways that, BIPOCs have been treated unfairly in this country, because a lot of us just carry that, right? Every single day you walk on the street and you feel that. And because of that, you know, I don't think when people say like, oh, don't bring politics into this or things like that, it's like, but we can't. I can't turn it off. I can't unbrown my skin. I mean, I can, but I'm not going to. But, you know, and I think that that is what people don't hear when they hear that, like, we're going to be more vocal, and there are people who are very vocal and there are people who aren't vocal. That doesn't mean our experiences are more than anyone else's. It just means that we're more comfortable talking about it and pushing against the status quo. And I think that for sure, absolutely, like, you know, I think if, you know, like I had someone commented something one time and just said like, oh, but I don't see, you know, I never see Black people riding bikes. And I was like, where are you riding bikes? If, you know, like I live in New Orleans, like I see Black people riding bikes all the time. It doesn't, you know, just because your experience is yours does not, like, it is your experience. It is yours to own. It is yours to understand, but you need to also realize that other people have different experiences too. And that just because the optics aren't there, you know, like if all you do is do cycling club group rides, then yeah, you're, you know, and you live in a predominantly, you know, white section of town. Yeah, you're only ever going to see white cyclists, right? But if you know, go somewhere else or go to a different cycling club, you might start to see other people and realizing that, like, we're here. You know, when people say, and I hate this question of like, why don't BIPOCs ride bikes? We do. There's a bunch right here, right now. None of us are in, you know, like, we're not in the same cities or anything like that. I can count 5 right now. And so, you know, I think that the more of us that are out there, whether or not you're political, whether or not you're vocal, whether or not you're on a road bike or you're racing or anything like that, like that's a statement. And whether or not you want it to be, whether or not you intend it to be, it's real powerful. And I don't know, sometimes it's a big reason why I'll just, you know, I've signed up for stupid races that I didn't want to race, but I did it because I was like, if one little brown girl sees me and decides that she wants to race one day, then, you know, yeah. So.
And maybe, you know, as soon as you were saying, you know, the all familiar, I don't see the brown people riding the bikes. It's just like, do you see brown people in general? Do you see them when you're walking? Do you see them in healthcare? Do you see them? Because, you know, the walk into people, ignore people, not hear people when they talk to you phenomenon among white people is a very real thing. And it's rooted in not valuing or wanting to see Black or brown people. So then carrying over that bias into just bikes is something that you totally could be doing. And I think a good question for folks, instead of pushing the onus of Black and brown people to show up on your radar and be great enough to be seen by you, might just be you asking yourself, why don't I see Black and brown people? Because we're everywhere, okay? There might be very few. Eric out there in Utah, you know, but like he's there. So why don't you see Eric? Where are you, as you pointed out, Elyse? Like, are you sticking to your own on purpose with exclusion? Like, stop putting the onus on us to prove to you that we want to do something. Like, human beings universally across percentages want to do the same things. Behavior-wise, they all do.
I do think what Christina said is really on point also into people, a lot of the time, yeah, people don't want to ride bikes with BIPOCs or interact with BIPOCs because they're afraid that they can't make the same comments they normally do when they're with their white buddies, or they can't, you know, they have to, all of a sudden they have to consider someone else, and it's the worst thing in the entire world. And the shit of it is that's what we have to do every day, right? Like, it's what we have to do when we get on our bike and when we join these group rides. So for them to have to do it one time is the worst thing in the entire world, but it's expected of us to do. You know, I have a nice little white Tears mug. Do I bring this out all the time to, like, if I brought this on a ride, do you think like the white men would be like, oh, Elyse, that's a great mug? No. But will they say racist shit to me? Yeah, absolutely they will. And it's like, how does that work? How does that, like that's not fair. And
that's a great notion that you're bringing attention to, which is the selectiveness of who gets to be political about race, right? A racist joke is white people talking politics in a joke form. Eric, you have a good story about who gets to be like being in a space where people are asserting their politics on you, via flags and presents. Could you
Yeah,
share with us?
yeah, like going off of what Elyse said, like this whole idea of like keep race out of keep race out of bikes or the outdoors. The only time that like white people say that is towards people of color, but they don't say that to other white people who are always bringing in race in some way or another, right? So I was in Moab not too long ago, and I took a photo because there's like, those not ATVs, but they're like razors or something. And
Yeah.
there's like a whole caravan of like 20 people, and they all had Trump flags, right? But I guarantee you, when like those same white people who tell us to keep race out of the outdoors, they don't go up to this Trump guy and go, hey, can you keep race out of it, or race and politics out of this? No, they don't, because they see that as like normal and natural. So it's who they tell that to is really important. So like, yeah, when I took this photo, I just thought it was really powerful and spoke for itself in terms of like how race is always a part of everywhere we go, so yeah.
Thank you. So I think that two kind of things have been brought up, which is when Elyse was bringing up, like, who are you cycling with and are you sticking to white folks? And then basically recognizing values and attitudes, right? Like, what do you value? And I guess a bit of responsibility about enforcing or making safe spaces. So I think it kind of what warps itself into like some level of elitism, right? It's about elitism. Marzhel, you've been working in a bike shop. Maybe you've had 10 years plus experience, like being a mechanic or being race support, and during the pandemic, dealing with retail and people being people during the pandemic. Can you talk about the importance of setting in-house culture and that defeating of elitism that lets someone say it's okay for white guy to talk shit or to intimidate through presence a brown person, but those brown people can't, bring up their issues, or just how, cycling is inherently a highly interpersonal sport and recreation. We all learn from each other. Like, you learn how to do one thing, change a tire, you learn how to dress, you learn how to eat. All these little pieces come together from each other. But if we have this spirit of elitism, how do you see that happening, and how do you see it impacting the year's future, Marzhel, for BIPOCs?
So in bike shops, as in like the cycling culture, like that tone is set from the leadership, and it flows downhill. I've been at shops with extremely racist shop owners, and all the white guys that I've worked with have been extremely racist. And when I've brought those things up, been pushed away, whether it was being fired, having my hours cut, working in a shop now where still white shop owners, but with a actual moral center, like a gooey moral center to them. I'll say that this was by far the most racist year in retail I've ever had. Feels like white folk like dialed it up to 11.
Why is that?
At the height, I think it was like a white lash, right? Like maybe like the second week that Philly had the protest going is when it was 1 week where every day I had a horrible racist experience at the shop. all white folk just like needing to be white space without brown and black people.
I mean, we got to articulate for those of us who, are outside of the experience, like what kind of things are we talking? And we're like, oh, how about like you're the manager, right?
Correct.
So as the manager, the brown manager, how's that been going for you?
It's, there've been some times where like folks come in complaining and like, I need to talk to the manager. It's like, you're already talking to the manager, like, and I'm very calm and cool and collected and trying to work with you, but you don't see me as, you see me as beneath all my, like the white employees. There's one gentleman, this, where in the middle of a conversation, unprompted, starts speaking to me in Arabic, just going off. And I'm just like looking at him like, why? Oh, well, I was trying to impress you with like, speak your language. I'm like, no, that ain't my language. Like, why would you assume that from me?
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, oh, well, I've got a lot of like Puerto Rican, like Nicaraguan friends, like also not me, different kinds of brown people. We are not all monoliths.
And how do you think that trickles down into what the mechanics allow themselves to do? Because you just keep saying like folks are racist around you. And I'm like, you're very clear. It's not like you're white passing, right? So the audacity of people to just go in so publicly seems concerning. Like where are people getting the
cues?
Yeah, where are people getting these cues, and like what should be happening in a shop that makes it different?
It definitely got better as I sat down and like explained to some of my staff, like, hey, this person said something really racist in front of you and nobody realized that this was happening. Like in the future, like these are ways we can support me or support other brown people or support like non-cis white men in this environment. It got better. There was a point in the shop where a lady just blank looked me in the eye and said, "Are you Indian? I need to know this." And like all the staff went like, "Whoa, you can't say that." And she felt really uncomfortable and left the shop, which should have happened. She should have been uncomfortable for saying that because she felt safe in a mostly white environment. But what the culture needs to be, it needs to be not tolerant of those kinds of behaviors and calling them out and not being worried that calling people out on their inappropriate behaviors in retail will cost them dollars. Mm-hmm. That's usually what it comes down to. In retail, the customer is always right. Like sometimes the customer is wrong and they're racist.
I feel that. Yeah. And also like we're in a pandemic, right? Like 2020 is the year of like the circumstances. Some people like to call it a perfect storm. I don't like that because people are dying, but it is certainly an unprecedented period in time where lots of people, whether for good or bad, have a lot more time to look and analyze things, right? And pay attention. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really appreciate when white people call other white people out, so I don't have to do the dirty work. Like I remember I was on this ride, and this guy and there's like these Mexican guys pass, and then someone goes, "What is it, Cinco de Mayo?" And I looked at him like, "Bro, I will fuck you up." But before I even did that, some white person stepped in and was like, "Hey, don't say stuff like that." I was like, "I'm gonna buy you a taco or something."
Why couldn't it be a croissant? Oh, why'd it have to be a taco?
Yeah, I'll buy you a panini.
Tacos are better than croissants, Courtney.
Yeah, they are. Well, it depends on what mood you're in.
Who doesn't want a good taco,
What if there was a taco in a croissant?
Nah,
I'm willing to try it. I
don't know.
Are you aware of what a Philly taco is?
It sounds like a porn move, honestly. So let's move on. So
kids here, all right?
I have warned their parents, okay? So if we're talking we're talking accountability. We're talking about attitudes and accountability in shops. Okay, basically I know the white people have heard this before. White people talk to the other white people, prevent them from doing stuff. Don't let them stress us out, right? What I was leading up to say was that right now we've got an unprecedented window of time, for good or bad. We got a lot of time. We got races not happening. We got group rides not happening so much. And there's a lot of time that can be used differently, right? So Elyse, your team, WTF, Gravel, you all are not racing right now. But you are working on a project. You've chosen to use y'all's time to keep meeting and to advance issues of equity and inclusion. You've used your brain power. You've turned muscle power into brain power. So can you just do two things for me? Can you backtrack and let people know how you ended up on this team? Because Elyse has just gotten onto the team this year via a non-traditional method that was in interest of diversity and inclusion. And as a team, they are now working towards some guidance regarding attitudes in space. And so I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. So I joined, I think in June. Time is not.
It's not real anymore.
It's not real. So I joined in a pretty, what you would consider a non-traditional way for this specific team. And this all to say, I hope all my teammates are here. I love y'all. Y'all are the best. But there was a recognition by team leadership and team members that there wasn't enough of a BIPOC representation on the team. And like you had mentioned earlier, WTF Bikexplorers is about bringing WTF non-binary, gender non-conforming, and other marginalized, underrepresented groups to the forefront and feeling like they have a space that is inclusive and supportive for them. And so that lack was definitely something they felt and that they wanted to address. And so I was brought on later on in the year, but not in a way that felt tokenizing. Because as much as, I didn't have to go through some of the hoops that the rest of the team did, I have a history of gravel racing. I've been racing for about 4 years now. So this wasn't just them picking me up and being like, well, you're a brown and you're on a bike, so we're going to put you on a team, which in my opinion is, it's harmful to people like me who do race and who do participate in this and who genuinely want to participate and have these spaces, because I think, what teams and brands can do that is particularly harmful is pluck people of color for the optics, where it's just disingenuous because it's not, is it what the actual person wants to do? Like you would never pluck, a random white person out of a crowd and say, you go race. You would have conversations, you would have understandings of that, and you would see what their history was and whether or not this was a good fit for them.
Qualifications.
Yes, exactly.
Content, qualifications, character.
Absolutely. And so if my qualification and my only qualification is the color of my skin, then I don't want it. I think, I joined the team with the expectation that, I was like, I'm just going to race on this team. Maybe I'll make a few friends, get some free things, which is great. But what I realized ultimately is that like this, there is a way to be on teams, because I've been on teams before that were predominantly white. And I've been on teams before where it did feel a little bit tokenizing. But this definitely feels like an opportunity where I can say my piece, where I can say things that might make other people uncomfortable, but they have to learn how to deal with it because I'm a team member. And that's the value add of having people of color in these spaces, in these conversations. And one of the things that we are working on, that we've been working on as a team and with kind of like our parent organization, which is WTF Bikexplorers, shout out to Natalia, who's my teammate who is leading this or kind of in charge of this, is a kind of like a how-to guide for race organizers and people in the industry to kind of just like, what is it to make an event something that we want to go to? And I'm not talking about, I want this kind of beer and like a rider or something like that. It's almost like a racial rider or a sensitivity rider. Like, don't if we're going to come to these races, to these events, make us feel included, make us feel like we're actually welcome. Don't just bring us there and then just forget that we're a part of this. If you genuinely want us there, you want us there, right? Like, you don't invite out, like, if you're an investor or something, you don't invite out a possible a possible like business partner and just leave them to their own will, right? You do stuff with them, you work with them, you have conversations with them about the things that they want and need. And that's kind of what we're putting together right now, is this document that just helps race organizers understand what we are looking for, what can help. A lot of race organizers want to talk about diversity and how they've increased the diversity and all of the great things, but you go to the event and you hear racist things, you feel excluded explicitly, and so guess what? No one's going to want to come to that, because we're also talking amongst ourselves and telling each other where we've felt unwanted and unappreciated. And so when that happens, you lose all of the BIPOCs that you wanted in your race in the first place. And so if you don't build those situations for us, we are not going to come to your races. Like,
are you saying there's a difference between being able to attract and retain people and what's needed to do those things?
Absolutely.
What's something that makes people come back? Like, when I hear you, and this is just to be clear for anybody who's not part of competitive races, right? Like, there's registration fees, there's travel, oftentimes, especially with gravel. Gravel races are just like butt fuck nowhere, like 2 or 3 hours outside of the airport, which are traditionally going to not be safe urban spaces where diversity is welcome, right? So that's already what's going on. So if we're talking about bringing people, that's possibly giving money for them to travel to get there. But now you have more environment. There's more environment. So we're talking about obviously kind of setting the tone, is that what I'm hearing? Setting the tone for what people act like at your event, as well as what else component wise could be like one of
I just think that's one thing. If you are the race organizer, you set the tone for an event, right? If you set the tone by using a racist slur, then guess what? You're setting the tone. That tone is there and people are going to participate in it, right? If you set the tone by then saying, I don't want this name anymore, then that does another thing, but you have to act with conviction. This has to be something that you recognize and you admit that, you like, I think the thing with gravel, right, is it has this face of like, we're so different from regular cycling. We're not road, we're not mountain, we're not cross, we're so different. And the thing is, as gravel really starts to continue to evolve, and it's been evolving for, I'd probably say like 20 years or so, it's just falling into the same tropes. It's falling into the same things that road has fallen into. You go to the Tour de France and you see white men, handful browns here and there, right, sprinklings, but you don't see the kind of representation or the understanding that like there's actual brown people out there riding. You go to a lot of these gravel events, you're seeing the same exact thing. And when you see that, what that says and what that does is it just makes gravel the same as road to me a lot of the time. And so how do you be different? How do you set the tone so that it's different? How do you do these kinds of things? You take away a lot of the racist institutions. You take away a lot of the sexist institutions. You take away gender conforming terminology. I'll shout out 2 races that I can think of that I think are doing really great things. One is Steamboat. Steamboat recently came out. They've been working with another group to provide 25 scholarship spots to BIPOCs who want to race. They're providing them with travel, lodging, registration, which is a lot of money, and training and a few other things. And that's just like the holistic experience. If all you're giving me is a piece, is all you're saying is here's a free reg, okay, you've addressed one barrier. You've not addressed the 50 other ones that you put there for me. And if you're not addressing the 50 other ones, or even just a handful more, then those barriers are still there for us. And so when that happens, there is stuff that can be done. And then the other race I can think of is Grinduro out in California. They now have I think they removed gender as a category or as a qualifier. And that's huge, because that is something that that's a very marginalized community of cyclists who, they deserve, just like, us cis people, they deserve to race the way that we race, and if you're providing them a welcoming space, if just at registration, you already feel a little bit more welcome because they've removed that, then, that's another sign, you don't have you don't have a racist name. Two, you actually are you recognize people's gender, then yeah.
Marzhel and Christina, I see you both nodding, and I think that you two might be the ones who've had maybe the most industry interactions over time. When Elyse is alluding to gravel just transforming into the same kind of, I guess, hyper competitive, monolithically white experience that road and other types of cycling have turned into. Do you have any thoughts about how or why that's coming, and just like why that transformation is going obviously the wrong way?
Well, the same promoters that have historically done a lot of these road races are the same people that are coming into these spaces and promoting these races, because being a race promoter or race director is not cheap. So usually they can pull some of the money from some of these other races and put them into like another pet project. And gravel is hot right now. Like I'm having very similar conversations with some of the local PA race promoters through my business that Elyse has been having, asking folks for support explicitly in my contract when I get contracted. One of the clauses is if I experience any sort of like racist, sexist, misogynistic behavior by any of your staff, I walk with your money. Like you lose my services for the day because I won't tolerate this kind of behavior. And I've only had one person call me out on it. Why is it trending to like white supremacy, white nonsense? Because that's where these promoters, that's the background of all these promoters.
So
it might
capitalism fucks us up again, right?
And it might be like in my own best interest to say this, but the best way that a race promoter, even like a small race promoter, whether it's a small gravel race, a small road race, or crit, the best support you can provide to make everyone feel included is have a neutral race support provider that can lend out equipment, because not everybody has the best race bike. Not everybody has a spare wheel set in case they flat out. Not everybody has a mechanical aptitude or can afford the mechanical experience of somebody. So we are there in these events to provide support to everybody.
So are you saying that everybody with the physical talent to be an exceptional racer and win on the podium might not own the best bike, Marzhel? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
I might not have thousands of dollars of their own to purchase a bicycle.
I've had
explicitly for racing.
I've had some event promoters not pay me, and a racer who podiumed because of my equipment split the winnings with me.
That's great of the racer. That's fucked of the organization. That is truly insane. And just for folks who don't understand the concept of neutral race support, could you, like, in terms of, because there are teams, right? And teams have their own support. What's neutral race support?
Neutral race support, organization that has equipment, wheels, tools, mechanics, cars, whatever, to provide support to those who can't afford to have their own race car or their own staff at events. And this usually comes into play in like the smaller events, local events, not like the big grand tours you see on TV.
So like a solo racer, just the kid with hopes and dreams, the adult who's just like, I don't have extra money for a new bike, but I want to be a part of this race.
Correct.
Would go to neutral race support to get support if a breakdown or whatever various would happen. Yeah. Cool.
You catch a flat. If you catch a flat in a crit and you have a neutral lap to fix your flat, not everyone can fix a flat in 2 to 4 minutes, but you can definitely walk over to the neutral pit and get a wheel and less than 30 seconds, 40
Mhm.
seconds, get you back in the race.
I think the revelation, or rather, I should say, I think it is a revelation to many people who are very steeped into what their version of cycling culture, that everybody doesn't have what they have, or like manage their bikes the way they, there's always this fun joke of like, how many bikes is enough? N plus one, basically never enough, keep adding. But there are people in life who aren't going to have access to extra bikes or an auxiliary bike. I have 4 bikes. I have my ride address bike, my beater bike, my do things bike, my look cute bike, right? But everybody doesn't have room for that. Everybody doesn't ride the same way, doesn't want to ride the same way. And this narrative of a certain kind of bike culture is a person who loves their bike, they're always having fun, and they're using their bike in that way is predominantly what our cycling industry markets to us in pictures and narratives and stories. But that's not the only narrative. And Christina, you've created Cyclista to be radical and share the stories that are not only that. Talk to us more about how what you are editing and curating into the world can, can change BIPOC inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, cycling culture has benefited so much from promoting a certain type of cyclist that is deeply embedded in elitism, classism, ableism, thin, able-bodied, male, and white. So when we're talking about privilege and having accessibility to sport, that is a different conversation than talking about mobility justice. That is a different conversation than talking about inclusivity. So the issue with media is that it's promoting a certain type of cycling culture that is extremely embedded in toxic masculinity. And we desperately have to move away from those narratives, because if we're ever going to truly create an inclusive cycling culture, we have to move away from these winners, these heroes, because they are also privileged themselves. So a good way to look at that is to look at influencers and athletes on social media, or on magazines, for example. A lot of them come from substantial privilege, and the normal, a kid who wants to cycle, but maybe mom and dad don't have enough money to get them started, that's a completely different story when you're talking about barriers, and you're talking about other types of bodies, other types, other genders, other abilities as well. So I desperately am trying to get the narrative to shift away from sports, because there is a hierarchy of bodies and elitism in sports that is privy to a lot of privilege. And so I desperately am trying to do that with the narratives of folks from BIPOC and WTF folks, getting their stories out, because I don't think that people want to hear stories from athletes anymore. I think people want to hear stories from other folks who have overcome certain barriers. Like, not all athletes, have to overcome barriers. A lot of, racing, you have to come from a lot of privilege already. If a lot of people start very young and go on. So we need to just move the conversation away from just talking about cycling sport. And those, because they also reinforce toxic cycling culture. And so, yeah, I like really want to just break down those notions of elitism, of hierarchies of bodies, that are valued in cycling sport, because they don't represent all of us. And, we really have to break down the barriers of ableism, in the sport too, whether that's coming from like different types of bodies or, abilities, and different types of bikes too. So we need to also just frame it from like a mobility justice perspective as well. because not all of us have the same access to mobility.
And mobility being the ability to move oneself with autonomy through space with safety and the same level of respect and security as everyone else, right? I love the hierarchy of bodies terminology. Thank you for that. Would you then say, Christina, given all of this that you've said, that it's important for really anyone who wants to promote cycling to kind of take some steps back and do a historical plunge into where does cycling really originate and with whom?
Yeah, I think we have to go back, especially if we're going to talk about inclusivity. And we talk about movements in cycling, because everybody looks at the bicycle as a tool for freedom, a tool for protest. Like even I talk about it that way too. But we have to look at the history of bikes, and the way that they've been used for revolutions, the way they've been used to mobilize women, in equal rights, in the way it's mobilized fashion for women as well, but also the outdoors itself also has a history that is deeply embedded in environmental racism. So that also has to be examined. So like you have issues of Indigenous forced removal, you have displacement of Black folks, communities and everything, and that also impacts the way that we're able to mobilize and the way that we're able to enjoy recreation as well on our bikes, and the way we can have access to trails. So yeah, I think having the discussions of history, not just in bikes, but also the outdoors and access, plays a huge role in how we access it now as well.
So we're coming up on getting to Q&A time. We, at the beginning, outlined that there are people in brands and companies that have tried. Elyse has given, Steamboat has given, what's your other one called? The other race that you were pro?
Grinduro.
Like these are good examples. Are there other brands that you think have been doing well? Like, right. So I personally am a fan of Machines for Freedom, not just because I was involved with them, but I chose to be involved with them and lend them the credibility of my character and my base because I saw them doing good things in terms of including lots of different people of color, ethnicities, body types. I think they've even begun to find and include in their advertising more people of different abilities, like respect for the people who, of their own volition, have chosen to be inclusive and more equitable, and not only showing them, but talking to their issues. So shout out to them. But while those folks are making progress in momentum, there are the ones who are intransigent. A big deal this year has been that everybody found out that Trek has been making the police bikes. And when folks tried to call them to accountability, like, well, you see what the police do with your bikes. Like, they're not even riding your bikes. They're just using them as fencing and like pushing people down. And the police themselves are horrible, right? And Trek chose not to engage in the conversation. They wouldn't even talk back. And I think that we have covered a lot that we are interdependent, right? We learn from each other interpersonally. Black Lives Matter happened, right, led by Black folks on behalf of their own lives, but so many of those activists and supporters are intersectional folks who are, that tide is lifting other boats. I've learned so much more about Indigenous issues, about land back, about the ways that folks of different abilities are also being disenfranchised, all in this big sweeping movement, right? But for those brands who choose to be intransigent, do you all think that there's enough consequence to them? You know, if they choose to not evolve, because they haven't evolved really in the past decades out of whiteness and maleness, is it really going to hurt them if it's just cyclists choosing not to spend money? Like, are they really going to hurt if the brown people just walk away? And what can we do, or like what have we seen has made, you know, a tide turn? I know, Elyse. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I think it may not seem like it immediately, but over time, you know, that's where things really start to build up, and then that pressure really starts to form. Like the things with that happened because of the murder of George Floyd didn't just happen because of this year. Happened because grassroots activists really pushed back on that years and years and years in the making, right? Of showing police brutality. So even if it doesn't seem like it in the immediate, I think that in the longer term, if we keep putting pressure on companies like Trek, who do, you know, like everything we can use, everything that we use can be a weapon or a tool, right, for liberation. Like the camera can be, like, you could really capture racist images, or you can do really, like, you know, produce really liberatory ones, or the same thing with the bike. So I think that if we put pressure, keep putting pressure, I think eventually it will make a dent.
And when you say we, Eric, are you thinking who composes your we when you say we?
It could be BIPOC or allies too, like people, you know, like I know some really, like, you know, the people within the biking community who do seek liberation for others. That's who I see as we.
At least when we were talking about your experiences with gravel racing and what happens when a race organizer chooses to change their attitude or not, one of the things that you said to me in prep was it doesn't hurt them if they aren't good enough at what they do. You know, if they invite a person of color, or like 10 people of color, and those 10 people of color have a shitty experience and don't come back, they can always replace them with 10 new people of color potentially, right? So how do we get over that? Like, because to me that sounds like impunity. It sounds like the ability to continue to leverage optics and have no consequence. So what do you think is the solution to that?
I think the solution to that, is gonna sound weird, is I don't know if you can see her on my the way that I do, but I think it's people like Christina. I think it's people like Christina who gather us all together around something that needs to be changed. You know what I mean? Like I've raced that race twice, and I had no idea the horrible, like, nature of the name.
And to be clear, we're talking about the event formerly known as DK, now known as Unbound.
And I think that when you have people who can really mobilize and bring other people to the conversation and to the table, and when that's what they're really wanting to do is bring more people there, that's definitely a way that we can change that. You know, because you know, that, like I was saying, you know, a lot of these races, they're just, you know, they're just, yeah, if 10 BIPOCs leave, they can just go find 10 other, you know, white gravel racers to fill up those spaces. But once you start to really point the things out that they're doing incorrectly, and then you're bringing more people to the conversation, and you're saying, you know, like, this is wrong, and the way that you're treating certain people is wrong, I think that mobilizes a lot of people. And I think community work is incredibly important in terms of us being able to say, you know, who we will and will not support, because, you know, unfortunately we live in a capitalist society. If I stop, you know, buying something from a racist company, it's not going to do anything. But if I blast that XYZ is not you know, fairly paying wages or something like that, and everyone else blasts it, that's the impact, that's the growth. And that's where I think we can really do some damage. So, I mean, yeah.
And Christina started this through the Name the Change campaign, right, which started as an online petition. And what impresses me most about it is not only were cyclists involved to remove an anti-Indigenous name from a gravel event, but it wasn't just the cyclists. It was community centers and cultural centers and religious organizations. So, I just look at all the pressure that needs to be applied to changes in the industry and wonder, like, do we need the priest and the rabbi and everybody else to come to? Christina is vigorously nodding. Please say more, bobblehead, Christina.
Yeah, I think, I've like this campaign has taught me so much. Like I've worked with people from all spectrums of academics, religions, social justice orgs, cyclists as well. And like I even had like intense conversations about ableism in racing, and how damaging that is, especially for people who are disabled. And then having, I've even had to have conversations with them about, okay, well, what does, an inclusive cycling culture look like to you? Because you've been living with this your whole life or for certain periods of time, and you have the solutions. I don't have all the solutions because I'm able-bodied. I don't understand what it's like or what is needed. So I think when I organized with all these folks, I learned a lot from them because they all came with different perspectives. But the goal was to get this name changed. But that became such a deeper conversation about, cycling, doesn't seem like a, some of us don't really care about it. But the fact that it's being, it's causing all this harm, and that the cycling community doesn't care also means that it doesn't care about these issues that impact the rest of us, and that doesn't impact the land. And so those conversations taught me a lot, that if you're going to organize, you have to, organize, in so many different ways, and hear other folks in a respectful way. So yes, I strongly agree. Organizing from grassroots at a grassroots level is so important. If you want to have an inclusive race, you need to be learning from people who are commonly disenfranchised. If you are going to create a DEI board, you need to be including people from the communities that you want to include, because they're the ones who have the solutions. So I'm just tired of hearing so many groups just saying, oh, we're just trying to figure it out, and we're still learning. Yeah, you're still learning, but who are you learning from? And by learning, you're going to need to work at a grassroots level, hire people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, hire them, include them in all the processes, because they're the ones who have the solutions, especially those grassroots organizations who have been doing the work for so long. So yes, it's completely important that we organize at a grassroots level.
And pay them.
I have
What's up?
And pay them.
And pay them. Please pay.
Another
Pay the panelists. Pay the panelists.
Another value add of that work, in my opinion, is I know that, they'll have like the people who will stand up for these issues will stand up when I need them to. Luckily for me, to a certain degree, I'm Asian American. We're seen as the model minority. Blah blah blah. We got a lot of privilege because of that. But there was a recent instance where a bike brand misidentified a Filipino woman as a Latina, and in my opinion, that's ridiculous. And that was actually brought to my attention by other community organizers and other people who I know if they needed me to call someone out, I would do it. And so then when I needed, or when my people needed them, they were there too. And having each other's backs, having that community that you can access is huge. And so I think that's just another really big value add for them, or for us.
So it is 6:35. So what I want to do is try like to take at least 3 questions and then come back for like summary statements. Somebody has pulled a motorcycle under my window that is playing very loud Mexican music right now. So I hope, I'm sorry if you hear that. It was you? Damn it, Marzhel. All right, so I'm gonna scroll through here.
It's Marzhel
And-
bringing you a Philly taco.
Oh Jesus, it just sounds like a nightmare.
Can I just real quick?
Yeah, go ahead while I'm scrolling.
Philly taco is
Yeah.
you go to a particular pizzeria that serves like a giant slice of pizza, and then you go to the cheesesteak corner and you buy a cheesesteak. You wrap
just sounds like death.
in a pizza, and then you eat that.
I'm out. I'm gonna head out.
All
Yeah.
those.
That sounds like indigestion.
That sounds like cholesterol. Sounds like a lot of things.
Yeah, does it come with like a bottle of Tums? Because then maybe, but like I'm gonna need.
I don't want to have to medicate afterward. Period. Like no.
I think I'm good on the Philly taco. Then I'm good.
Marzhel, is this something that you like have participated?
I've never
Oh, so you're out here endorsing things you wouldn't even do? Come on, son. Don't do that. All right, I'm gonna start from the middle and work our way up. Again, if you've not voted for questions, you can go to the Q&A box at the bottom and vote them up or vote them down. Well, I think mostly just up. But yeah, vote for the questions that you want to see answered. And I'm gonna pick the ones that I think like fold in best to the conversations or give actionable items that I know the panelists can actually respond to well. Okay, so maybe 2 of you can choose to respond, and that way we can work through more. All right, so Jackie Rivera, they them is asking, in terms of pay equity, say a small bike company just getting off the ground who needs media content, is an invitation to collaborate with BIPOC photographers, valuing their lens without paying them, doing more harm than finding willing white allies who I assume what they're talking about doing it for free, who would donate for free. So what's better? So like we've got a small company that doesn't have a lot of budget right now. What's the better move in your opinion? Eric, obviously this is your life. Would you rather somebody give you exposure or find some white person who they won't offend by getting donation?
I think this is where you flip the script and go, yeah, if we're not going to pay them, give it to a white person, for sure. No, because I feel like we're always asked to do a lot of things, right? And so like when we're asked to do it for free,
yeah.
And there's some things like we want to do, right? Like that's better for the betterment of the community. But when you constantly get asked that to spend your time and your energy and your wisdom on things, and it's being asked to do it for free, while at the same time someone is benefiting from it financially, it's really frustrating to get a lot of those requests. Like if it were just one a year, it probably wouldn't be a big deal, but it's like quite a few times a month. Like that can, on top of everything else that you're doing for to make money, it becomes a lot.
Okay. Christina, you're our other media person. Are you of the same opinion, or would you do something different?
I'm of the mindset of paying folks for their labor, especially BIPOC folks, because we sometimes that accessibility to even be able, photography, having a camera is expensive, and the time is also is expensive too. So, and also the emotional labor that you having to do behind that, if you're working with a certain type of company that doesn't understand the nuances and interactions of being BIPOC, that's additional labor. So I think paying people for their BIPOC especially is important.
All right. I had something to say, but I forgot. So that's cool. Sure. So there you have it. Pay people. Oh, the thing I was going to say is, And, you know, I look at this with a small bit of compassion for like a new company. And I might be apt to try to be dynamic about what you give me, or like, you know, because there was that guy who like painted Facebook and got stock instead of, you know, like money, and now he's a billionaire. But, you know, also if you're not gonna go public and have that trajectory, then whatever. But the point is, stop trying to pay people in product too. Like, don't come off top. If you can pay people money and you're like, here's a product that's worth something, no, give me the worth of it because I'm worth it. Also, nobody's confused that when you give us product, it's advertising because you got a brand logo on it. So
Can I add to this, because I did blogging for 12 years, and I was doing a lot of reviews for small brands. The thing is that a lot of them do offer like exchange of like goods. So that's cool. But the thing is, the cycling industry in general is so behind on utilizing influencers. In the way that they pay. And also it's illegal to not, this is what the cycling industry needs to understand. It's illegal to not pay influencers. Like, there are actual guides out there that says specifically, because there's like this whole thing about utilizing influencers and just giving them things that doesn't actually pay the rent either, especially for BIPOC, where we're like managing 2 jobs, you know, and don't have, you know, the privilege to access these things. So there are actual laws that prevent things like that too. So it's important to know.
Yeah, can I add something too? Like, another thing is like BIPOC often value themselves in a sense. Yes. Like when they say they're like, oh, how much do you want? How much do you charge or something? And in your mind, you have a number that you think is like fair and what you deserve. But then sometimes we like kind of like undersell that, and we go on a number lower. So it's really important to like, you know, what your labor is worth. And the worst they can say is no, you know, so really try to go for what you think you deserve.
Yeah. And as a brand, if you see somebody like super lowball themselves, like, be compassionate and be like, you know, typically this, that, and the other happens. Like, it's, you were willing to pay it in the beginning, okay? So just give them the money.
And you mind if I add it real quick?
All right, this is the last one because we're gonna get a new question. Go ahead.
Even as a brand, when you don't value somebody and you pay them in product, you're devaluing your own product. Because what am I gonna do? I'm gonna go flip that for half of what it's worth. I need money. Like, I can't pay rent and tires and tools. I'm gonna flip that for way under market value and devalue your brand because I gotta eat. I gotta pay rent.
Out the hustle.
It
really
the
is.
hustle.
I also don't have time for that, so you're gonna pay me money or nothing.
I asked for money, not a job. I already did a job. I didn't want another job in payment for my first job.
There you go. All right. Lydia M wants to know, what can white industry leaders and folks in the bike world do specifically to create safe and inviting spaces for BIPOC folks to thrive? Let's tackle that from the safety aspect. Like, when you show up and you feel safe, what is because safety is different to everybody. Like, what is a safe space? Like, it could be safe professionally, safe, you know, verbally. What does safe look like?
I think recognizing that what you just said, that safety is different for different people, you know. What normally comes to mind for me when it comes to that kind of stuff is when people are just like, disregard that, you know, the experience of just basically non-cis white men is completely different in terms of our safety, right? I can't ride my bike in a lot of the same spaces because of who I am, and I just don't feel safe. And so recognizing that those are real concerns and listening to what we say, you know, if we're telling you that we don't feel safe in a specific place, listen and take note, you know.
And
like
we can make that more tangible. Like, what's an example of a setting where some accommodation, I guess we're talking accommodation wise, like what's a reasonable accommodation that somebody could make, like at a race? to make a person of color or maybe a person of a different gender feel like, yo, here you go. This your safe space. Like, what does that look like? Perhaps.
I think that what they can do is you know, make the event. That's a hard one. And
Okay.
I might have to think about that. Go on.
Marzhel, what you want?
So, like, one of the most base accommodations that I've actually had to talk to like race announcers about before, especially during the women's like 4-5 or 1-2-3 races, when you know these athletes are just like pounding away and just in such pain, and the race announcer without fail is like, these ladies are hurting, don't forget to smile, ladies. Like going up to these announcers and being like, don't say that.
I mean, I can tell you that, and I am not, Courtney's not racist, never gonna do it probably. But I can say that my feelings of safety come from, just like Eric said, oh boy, shouted dude down when he made that racist comment. Like, safety for me feels like being in a space where I know my professionalism is valued and protected. So even though I did have to get on a phone or a conference call and like tell somebody they were not going to try to like to distract from who I was and like my titles, because they decided they didn't know me, so they were going to talk over me. I was like, what you're not going to do is, you know, try to distract from me and stop people from listening to me and making my point. But if somebody else, if I know that I'm in a room or a space where other people will be like, don't come for her, don't try, and like, I will beat you down on behalf of her, I appreciate that. Because when you love somebody, you beat other people down. Fuck with. That is true. So that's
Don't be the person that sends a private message like that was messed up, right?
Don't be like, oh, that was so messed up. Like we talked about setting the tone and like, you know, making it known like it's sort of like coming to somebody else's house. And I mean, I think white people do this a little less than like brown folks, but like brown family goes to another brown family's house, you get the speech about what you're not gonna do, what you're not gonna touch, how you're not gonna act when you go to somebody else's house, because that's their house. And in their house, to be like, what you're not gonna do is act this way, say these words, or blah blah blah. And that needs to be a public sentiment. And there's not like culturally, I think white people are more adverse to being seen as somebody who is willing to engage in conflict than people of color who have to constantly engage in conflict and vocalize their opinion and their disdain for things. Y'all need to step it up. We are doing it, and that's why there's that moniker of the angry Black woman, the spicy Latina, all that. That's just us actually protecting ourselves and saying what matters to us. You need to say to other people that we matter to you, and your friends and your whoever walk up in your existential house is not going to do the same thing. It's not going to be allowed to act some kind of way toward us. I mean, that's where I'm at. Lucia D. Okay, Lucia, you ain't using enough periods and commas for me. I'm gonna see. When having conversations with white-owned brands on what actions they should take, many hesitated or are still hesitating to speak on the issue of lack of diversity or broadcast what they've done or are planning to do to help because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing or being perceived as performative or virtue signaling. Okay. This has been frustrating because to me, a woman of color, seeing brands stay silent is also harmful. What's a good way to encourage brands to do the work while also showing public support for the cause? Are they right to stay silent? Well, that obvious answer is no, they are not. I don't know. Did I kind of address that with the like you need to like step it up and talk? What more do you all have to say? It's been frustrating for Lucia to see people staying silent. What's a good way to encourage brands to do the work publicly?
I've seen and talking with a lot, I mean, just being a fly on the wall when all these conversations are happening at industry events, I know a lot of brand managers or, you know, marketing folks are worried about the white lash they'll face if the lens of their company isn't white focused. A lot of them are worried about white people walking up and taking their money somewhere else. I think of Rivendell Bike Works, who like re-announced, or it came up again this year, that they were doing the reparations pricing for bikes. And I think of all those comments of like white folks saying, I'm never going to buy another Rivendell bike ever again. Rivendell Bikes is fine. They're doing great. Like these brands realizing that they have more to gain by taking a stance than by staying silent.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think the younger, like millennials and younger, like we're a completely different generation where we want to support brands that are doing the work, that also work from a lens of social justice as well. So I think our purchasing power is getting stronger. We're also the generation that is inheriting an incredible amount of wealth. And also the classes, in BIPOC communities, is increasing. So we, the purchasing power that we're going to have later on is going to be enormous. So I think you're either going to kind of sink or you're going to swim with us, because I don't think we want to buy things, that has a taste of white supremacy.
And I would also say if they want to stay silent, that's not right too, but if they want to stay silent, let them. Show your ass. Show us that you don't care. Because I'd rather know who doesn't give a hoot about things that I find important, Because,
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, like if I'm going to buy something out there and I'm going to compare and I'm going to be like, oh, these are very similar products, and I'm going to compare A, B, and C. I see that A was silent. I see that B did a black square, and I see that C is a BIPOC owned company that, 10% of their profits go to a nonprofit doing really good work, but theirs is the most expensive. I'm still buying C, because to me, they're the ones that, mean the most.
I think
Yeah.
Another generational value that complements what you were saying, Christina, about us caring what people have done as an organization, is also that we do research and we communicate about you. I think part of what moved the needle so much in 2020 is that folks are willing to take the time to sniff you out, find out what you did, if you ever corrected it, tell each other, and will cancel your ass in a very public way. They will make a campaign out of canceling you. So it's to your benefit to just get with it. And the people for whom the bike boom is happening, it's not old timers per se, are not making up the bike boom. It's young people are making up the boom. So if you're trying to please an audience, I would bet on young, because there's more of them and they're going to be spending longer. Christina, chime in, and that'll be our last comment before wrap up.
Yeah, I think, just to answer Lucia, that you do want to encourage them to take action first. Take action first, and then you can talk about it. Because I think like what we're seeing so many optics being played out, but not tangible action. So what I would say to brands is I would have these difficult conversations with them and say, well, hey, I think it's important that, that we work on an initiative, start it, and then, down the line, we start talking about it more, because it is better for us to do something than just these nice little optics, because I think the biggest issue right now is the optics within the cycling industry. But yeah, I think you have to meet your words with actions too. So we want them to do better. We want to encourage them, and I think that's something that they can just start out, just do what needs to be done. Then you can talk about it too. You don't have to make all these promises all at once, but do something.
Okay. So what I'm going to ask everybody in wrap up is, all right, so there's obviously the optics, and optics ain't good enough. Optics is self-serving. It is temporary. It is the performance with the beginning. and an end, begin, middle, and an end, right? That's climax. And we've said that progress is defined more or less by some level of impact. We've said the impact is, feeling safe, feeling welcome, feeling reassured, that when a BIPOC enters a space, the engagement, the interaction, the relationship, that it's not going to go south. If we could, if each of you could just like give maybe 2 words more, of we want BIPOC inclusive activities, and not even inclusive, because inclusive is territorial. It means you own it and I'm letting you in. But instead of like restorative, we want BIPOC restorative presence for what it should be if, all these negative segregationist, exclusionary things didn't happen. What does impact look like on behalf of the BIPOC? What more does it do for them? What does progress feel like, look like? What's the quality? What qualities make it progress? That's what I want to know as we sign off tonight. Elyse, want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think what it does is it helps us realize and achieve our value. I think progress makes us, I was talking to some other BIPOC people about how we don't feel like we deserve things sometimes. And I think progress is an active way to identify and to say, no, you do. And so I think that it increases, it just helps us see our value in ourselves, if that makes sense.
Sure. Who's up next? Marzhel, you're unmuted.
What is progress for us?
Yeah, what is the impact of progress, right? Because anybody can make the change and do the performance on behalf of themselves. What really is happening for BIPOC when true impact that enables them to be there and go forward? What does that actually do?
I mean, we're able to become fully realized people that we've always wanted to be. Thinking of my life pre-receiving the scholarship to be a race mechanic and post that, I felt like I accomplished something I always wanted to do. I was able to negotiate better pay for myself. It night and day. Like, my life is more complete because I feel supported and embraced by my professional organization.
And you've invested that energy into a new generation of people too.
We will be announcing recipients soon.
Okay, we are awaiting those announcements. Who's up next? Eric?
Sure. I think one of the things is really for BIPOC is fighting imposter syndrome. Like, I think that a lot of us feel like, I know for me with my photography, at first I was like, I don't know if I belong here. I was really nervous about it. But I think one of the things that's really important is like to see yourself as someone who can create these really beautiful things, whether it's storytelling or video or anything like that, to really, and the only reason I've really been able to push through that is because of the BIPOC cycling community has been super, super supportive, So I think just replicating that kind of community building for others is really important.
All righty, take us home, Christina.
I'm going to piggyback on that because I really do believe that once we are able to realize ourselves, to build our confidence and our skills, we're also able to bring in our communities with us. We're able to pass on that wealth of knowledge, accessibility, because we've had to go through the hurdles, to get to where we are. But now that we have the tools and understand the ins and outs of things, we're able to help them break those barriers and just streamline into it. So I think, bring our gente in, our people, like bringing the others with us is what it's about. But also like, not just that, but like bringing in others who are, more disenfranchised too. So yeah, I think being able to break down the hierarchies, and having others included.
And that's why Christina's zine is like super important, because there's only so much that like these other companies can do, but like we need a radical space like Christina's. So support her.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And when you open that zine and just as you continue in progressive spaces, you're going to hear, and I'm surprised we didn't do more of it tonight, like you're going to hear a lot more use of the terms white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. And what you need to understand about white supremacy is that the way white supremacy is able to exist, and one, that it's intended, from ancestors way back when, to keep white people always having all of the opportunities. And that is at the cost of people of color, but Black and Indigenous people of color, being stripped of the resources that they need to have the bare minimum, right? Like if I can keep these people unstable, they can't make for their individual selves, and they surely can't make for their communities of selves, right? So when Eric and Christina say, giving BIPOC equity and investing in their justice is so that they can invest in their community, like it's not a forever. I know a lot of people tend to think of these efforts as like affirmative action and like this debt that they have to pay back egregiously, like mad that I'm gonna have to support these brown people forever. If you restore what was supposed to be, you give us back our autonomy and we can keep going on our own, which no one here, I want to just point out, no one on this call tonight who's gotten ahead or gotten help through a diversity or equity effort has said, oh, I deserved it because I was brown. They said, I didn't want to take it if I didn't feel like it was earned and I wasn't the qualified person to be the recipient of what gave me that I now want to give to another. But just want to put that out there for reflection. And I guess to cap off tonight, thank you all. It's been a fantastic evening, enlightening for all. I'm sorry to everybody who didn't get to answer your questions. I will try to copy them and maybe like send them to the panelists for them to maybe get back or just like riff on in the future. Maybe they'll show up in an issue of Christina Zine. Who knows? But yeah, so thank you again to our sponsors, Greater Philadelphia Bicycle Coalition, for this technical support and platform, Philadelphia Bike Expo for giving us our first seed monies for the panelists, so they have a little nugget. But for you all watching who've tuned in, again, please make a contribution to the Panelist Compensation Fund by New York is happening, sorry, by sending electronic funds to Marzhel. Info in the chat box, which you might not see on YouTube, but you can get to via my Instagram as well. You can Venmo at Marzhel, Marzhel-Pinto, Pinto, or you can PayPal Marzhel.pinto@gmail.com. So hopefully we'll find out that some funds have come in. This is 2 hours, professionals. Please give a reasonable compensation to them if you can, if you appreciate it. And I'm gonna say, anything else I should say? Oh, I've got an event in January. I've dared to plan something for January, which is a workshop called Centering POC Affirming Events. So if you've now heard this and you're like, how do I technically go about planning an event that's about or for Black and brown people and do it respectfully without it being like tokenizing or just I have no guidance and can't figure out what to do. That event is also on my Eventbrite page, eventbrite.com/the brown bike girl, I'm pretty sure. And you can read through that description and I'll walk you through like 3 different levels of planning that somebody who's uninitiated in like that level of history and equity and diversity can approach. So I hope that helps you into the future, make some plans, and I'm sweating. So signing off. Thank you all. Have a good night. I'm gonna try to copy these questions, so Stephanie, don't shut us down right now, okay? You all can say good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Buenas noches.
Good night.
Okay, Lee's got the questions. Boom. That's why I pay.